May I start by saying we have a very important speaker, that's Lori Hinkey, who's our trade person, so I'm going to try to be as brief as possible on this. But I do want to give a quick overview of some slides. I beg your forgiveness prior to this rather than well, I guess maybe I should beg your forgiveness after as opposed to your permission beforehand, but I'm going to run through a lot of slides pretty fast to give you a little perspective about what's the thinking of NPPC, how do we look at the world, as well as what are some of the topical things coming up. And you're going to see soup to nuts, you're going to see some legislation stuff, and you're also going to see some precursor stuff to Lori's trade discussions. And with that, let me get started. Anybody has a question, feel free to ask. And again, I've got almost 25% of my board of directors in the room, so they can correct me, which they often do, if I misstate something or give a different perspective, but also anything that they would like to add into this, we'll go ahead. So, that being the case, for those of you who aren't intricately aware of NPPC's role, our mission is to be the global voice of the U.S. pork industry. We do that in 3 mission areas. We fight for regulation and legislation that is conducive to the industry. We work on developing trade opportunities. That's where it says developing revenue market opportunities. For us, that's trade policy work. You're going to hear more about that. And trade policy meaning international trade policy. And then protecting your livelihood. I'm going to show you something here. How many people in this room do not live in the Mississippi watershed? I know the young man from out east. You're not. Well, we got maybe 2 or 3. Okay. I want to talk about this because when we talk about freedom to operate, where things are coming, and it ultimately will rely on regulatory schemes, but I want to show you something of other things we work on that deal with trying to protect producers' ability to compete. We are voluntarily funded. We are funded by producers at the rate of 10 cents of every $100 of value of pigs. That's voluntary. We return 40% of that money to state organizations, in this case the Iowa Pork Producers Association, for use in the same areas, legislative, regulatory affairs. We work with the National Pork Board that oversees the National Mandatory Pork Checkoff, which is a 40-cent per $100 of value. They work in the areas of promotion, research, and education. Okay? By law, Congress will not allow checkoff dollars to be used to lobby. Well, that's why we're voluntarily funded. For those of you who are interested, this is roughly the percentages of our budget. Actually, this is the 2010 version. As you see, about 40% of our budget in legislation regulation. That's lobbying. That's working with departments in Washington, regulatory agencies. About a quarter of our budget goes into export market opportunities. And again, these are not things like promotions in a given country. These are things like, most recently, the negotiations that occurred on the Korean Free Trade Agreement, and our efforts to try to get those through Congress to allow the door to be open so we have a chance to go into the market, so other groups like the National Pork Board fund activities that will actually promote the product in country. Protecting your livelihood, again, that's the 15% gets into areas where it's really not legislation, it's not regulatory, or it's not trade policy work, but it deals with producers' ability to operate and the freedom to operate. And then finally, this 22% investment recruitment. Actually, that's not totally accurate. It's not just investing in investment in recruiting and communications. It also includes things like a World Pork Expo, which NPPC does. Those costs are there. So it gives you a little perspective where we're at. Quick one, the history of the population of the world going back, what, 2 to 5 million years? And you'll notice that for a long time, the total population of the world was under 1 billion people. And then suddenly, around the 1500s, something changed. And as you can see, we are on a very steep curve in the population of the world. Anybody eventually guess what might have changed there? I don't have the definite answer. I give my scenario. would suggest that's when the New World was discovered. Suddenly you had things like potatoes that were found in the New World that didn't exist in Europe. Vice versa, you had species, swine being one that were brought to the New World. And suddenly what we had is we had enough food to feed a lot more people. And with that, we continue to grow. Everybody's most likely seen this as the geographic map of the world. The question I have for you, everybody see this in their elementary school board, it's the landmass of the world. Okay, now what happens if we today would take the population of the world in these countries and allow every man, woman, and child to have 2 square meters of space? Okay, so they get a 6 by 6 spot that we're going to allocate to everybody. And what does that do to the landmass? It ends up looking something like this. And I want to point out a couple of things. Obviously, it's very difficult to miss Asia, and obviously with that, the density of population. I also point out the U.S., North America, and South America actually shrink when you do that. This also points out, as we take a look into the future where we're going to grow food, where's it going to be done? It's probably going to be those places where it isn't quite as densely populated. And that's why I think you're going to see North America, South America, and the plains of Eastern Europe are going to grow in their importance to the entire world as far as food production. This is another way of looking at the map. If this takes 2000, gives you a perspective of where the world is geometrically, and then it makes projections based on the UN numbers to where population growth will occur, and goes to 2050. It's projected that by 2050 we have to double our food production to feed the world. Okay? Now, the estimates at this juncture is that of that doubling of food production in order to feed the world population, less than 10% of it is going to come from new arable land going into production. Okay? Less than 10% of that increase. And that would be things like deforestation places for diversion. 87% of that increase has to come from technology. Being better at what we do, being more efficient, etc., taking use of feedstuffs. So, with that as a background, that's kind of the perspective. And finally, this is the UN numbers on projections on world population growth. We're right about here, and we're right about on track with that purple middle line. So we're headed to close to 10 million people in 2050. Now, any of you have children, please don't do what my folks did to me. Because the reality is, I get excited when I get a chance to talk to young people. If you don't think this will be an exciting career to feed the world, then sadness. There are going to be so many opportunities. My point is, when I grew up, it's like, oh, go to college, get an education, don't be involved in agriculture. The reality of it is, obviously, it's still involved in agriculture, but the point being is, there are so many opportunities coming. We're going to need good thinkers. Just got to start talking about issues here. Any questions? Let me know. First one's the import shock. We know this has been coming. We've actually seen some of it. It started in 2006. It was exacerbated by the 2007 energy bill as we start looking at encouraging more production of alternative energy sources. It's been working its way through the chain, as we all know, the last 3 years have been reasonably dismal for a lot of reasons, including not just cost of inputs, but also things like H1N1. I'll talk about that in a second. So the point being is that when the reason we talk and look at things is managing risk, we either look at how do we manage risk from an organization standpoint, or what are the opportunities we can exploit. And obviously, as we know, this input shock is making its way through the whole chain. Interesting article on Monday. McDonald's informed its investors that it will be raising its prices this year, or have to, because of the price of input cost in the restaurant business. And the reality of it is, given our producers' cost of production, as you all know, if we don't see higher market prices, there will be even fewer pigs produced. I want to talk a little bit about the federal government. This is one of the, to give some perspective of what our federal government is, and obviously President Obama gave his speech last night talking about the State of the Union, but this pretty well points out some of the debate that's coming ahead. Non-discretionary spending are things often people talk about as being entitlements. This is things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, etc. And really, relatively speaking, the kind of framework for available cash to make decisions on, to fund and not fund, is relatively small as a percentage of the budget. With that, as we take a look out in the future for the kinds of things that may be happening, and I'm sure you all heard the discussion at the end of 2010 about the President's Bipartisan Commission on Debt. Things I just want to point out here. These were some of the recommendations. This is for the next 10 years, but they're recommending cutting spending by $2.2 trillion and increasing taxes by $960 billion. They're looking at some pretty interesting things, and as you heard the President speak last night, and if you heard Paul Ryan, who gave the Republican response afterwards, the debate in Washington near term is going to be very much about spending and about taxation. Now, with that, there are ramifications, obviously, for agriculture. There's a number of things that go into here, everything including this commission suggested eliminating some farm subsidies, particularly the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, MAP, which is the Market Access Program, which is what our industry accesses through the Pork Board and the U.S. Meat Export Federation to get some additional help to export product. Talking about increasing gas tax. So anyway, that gives you the context of the discussion, the debate, legislative we're going to go through. This is our outlook for 2011 that you can see going to be operating in, issues that we're working on. We're not working on all of these issues by any means, but they will have potential for our industry. One thing I'll point out, and I don't have any slides in here, I don't think it's specifically about the elections, but there are 93 new congressmen in the House of Representatives. 9 of them are Democrats, the rest are Republicans. You have a House of Representatives Ag Committee that's going to be talking about a 2012 Farm Bill that has 23 new members out of 46. Okay? Not only that, last week when the Democrat members of this Farm Bill task force or the Ag Committee were named, a number of them are from the Northeast, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, not your traditional agricultural states. So there's some very interesting dynamics coming forward as we look at the 2012 Farm Bill. Now, the first thing people think about the 2012 Farm Bill is, gee, that's all about crop subsidies. Well, the reality of it is there's a number of other things that directly impact the pork industry. One of it is a livestock title. It talks different issues in livestock. Another thing that's in the Farm Bill is the authorization for our animal health programs in this country, our federal veterinary system, and funding for state veterinarians, etc. So there's quite a debate coming. But you'll see there's a whole number of things coming this coming year that's going to be circling around costs. Let's see if, there we go. 2012 Farm Bill, the point about this is when the House was controlled by the Democrats last year, they started Farm Bill hearings last June. Frank Lucas, who's the new chair of the House Ag Committee, who happens to have an ag economics degree from Oklahoma State, both a master's and a bachelor's, gets it. He understands agriculture. He understands business agriculture. And he is not overly enthusiastic about starting Farm Bill hearings. And part of the reason is there are issues that he wants to make sure that agriculture can produce for our domestic consumers and for the international consumers. And if there is too much change, it may be very difficult for the atmosphere for us to do our role in producing food. That being the case, he's very concerned because there's a real thinking in Washington right now. The first bills off the block in this atmosphere are ripe for getting cut significantly. Now, we do not believe through the Farm Bill process, that agriculture will be cut disproportionately to any other federal program. However, you have to also understand, this is an old Kika Della Garza speech. He talks about, he used to serve on the Armed Services Committee, and he was chair of the Ag Committee. One time he got a chance to tour a nuclear submarine. And when into a summary, they took out the trials, and he asked the captain, says, "Captain, how long can you stay down?" And he goes, "Hey, we can stay down here indefinitely. We make our own fresh drinking water, we make our own, we circulate the air and purify it. We have a nuclear reactor that will run for years and years and years. There's only one thing that means that we have to stop and come on. Because what's that? Because of food." And I submit that we are coming into a time very similar to that food's going to become more appreciated, partly because of cost, but also because of the nature of the role it plays in society. With that, Mr. Lucas doesn't want to put a farm bill up in front of Congress. We'll talk about some other things here as we go on to the one point. As I said, he won't go into 2012, and it may very well see a farm bill get extension. One of the things that's on here is direct payments to crop producers that has been put in the debt emission reduction plan is one of the top things because the debt commission suggested it. It's one of the top items that is on the agenda. And again, it's going to be about dollars. And just to give you a perspective on, this is the last farm bill where the spending has occurred, what was projected and what's actually occurred as of August of this past year. The CCC, which is the Commodity Credit Corporation, which deals with a lot of programs associated with our food handling system, you'll see that's $8 billion less money spent than was anticipated. You'll see these kinds of things, these kinds of issues. And again, these are all millions of dollars. And as we go through, you'll see either the increases in projections or the decreases. One thing I would point out here is the scale of, there we go, the scale of this SNAP, for those of you who aren't aware of it, stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's food stamps. 77% of our farm bill is feeding programs. In essence, it's a food program. I mean, our farm bill is not a food bill. The chances are, kind of remember, since this last recession, we're going to see even more pressure on that kind of funding going to agriculture. I've really pretty much covered this. The one point I would leave with, we don't anticipate agriculture will be disproportionately cut. We do anticipate the budget pressures are going to be such that there will be cuts made. Run through a whole number of issues here. The Grain Inspection Pact Stockyards Administration issued a rule in June. The 2008 Farm Bill required that JIPSA look at these 5 areas for improvement in the regulations of the administration. One of them dealt primarily with the poultry industry. The other ones are over poultry, swine, cattle production, in fact, all livestock production. Issues like notice of termination, additional capital requirements. How do you handle a contract breach and opting out of arbitration? Defining undue preferences was also included. The rule we saw come forward, we've probably all seen precedents, went way beyond this, and fundamentally what it did was it lowered thresholds for suits by anybody. It talked about all price differences needed to be justified, but gave no guidance on what was a justified cost or a justified price difference. That atmosphere is creating such that I will tell you from my perspective, I believe that this rule was put forward a concern that the pork industry would integrate. And a lot of people think the pork industry is integrated, but anybody who's in it realizes it's really got a mix of different things. A lot of problems that the poultry industry used integration to fix, pork industry's found other ways around those. Nothing against integration. And the reality of it is the way this rule comes forward and the kinds of incentives in the business atmosphere, not the regulatory atmosphere, but the law sets up, would lead to rapid, in my opinion, integration. Now, MPPC studied this, we submitted, and I didn't bring it with us. The board's seen it. The last board meeting I offered this to whoever wanted it. I send home the NPPC response to the gypsum rule, which is in 2 3-ring binders that we put forth testimony. Didn't get any of the board members volunteered to take it home in their suitcases. It is on our website if you're interested in seeing our response. But one thing I put forth with this, the rule is now being looked at again, and it will probably be sometime this summer before we see the outcome of it. This rule may very well lead to litigation, but we'll see what happens. So, latest on that. And I'm running out of time because I want you guys to hear more. But a number of other kinds of issues I want to talk about. And this is timely with the announcement yesterday. In Korea, they're reducing their tariffs on imported, certain types of imported pork products, roughly 60,000 metric tons of products at the end of this month and June, as a result of attempting to keep food price inflation down because of the fact they had foot and mouth disease. It had it's now over 2,000 farms. The livestock that they sent to slaughter, they slaughtered. A number of things going on here. Another issue going on right now is Europe. As you've well seen, dioxin in poultry feed and swine feed. Yesterday, the European community, the Commission, opened up what they call their storage assistance. It's what the European community uses to help buffer shocks and prices back to agricultural producers. The problem with that is that they have dioxin that made it through the feed chain that is consumed by animals, showed up in tests of animals. Those animals need to be destroyed, thus less available meat available. So we get the animal health issues critically important. It goes back to H1N1. In the course of about 3 days, what are we going to talk about H1N1 at all? Are you going to be the point of the H1N1, we saw that within 3 days, we had several markets. Even though there was no human health issue and no swine health issue, we had some of our trading partners close the borders. Okay? We're still dealing with one issue with one country that still wants us to certify that the pork came from herds that never been exposed to swine H1N1. Okay? So what's happened over the last 40 years is we've gone from tariffs controlling product coming into countries to other kind of non-tariff products. I'll let Lori talk further about that. The issue, though, animal health is critically important. When the U.S. closed its border to Alberta, about 7 years ago, after the Canadians discovered BSE, the price of cattle in Alberta the next day went down 65%. Critically important. I've been CEO here for a few years. I've had, unfortunately, the opportunity 3 times to be in meetings, industry meetings, waiting to get a response on a suspected case of foreign animal disease that was being tested, that we thought we were being told by different places that we maybe had a 50-50 shot at having foreign animal disease in this country. Fully knowing that if we did, our export markets would close. Okay? We're producing 25% of the hog that we produce are going out of this country in some form next year. We import about 4%, so we've got about 1/5 of our herd that relies on exports. We get our, I guess my point is, think about what happens if we end up having border closed. And with that, animal health, our surveillance of animal health, our ability to recover are all critical issues. And again, when we're talking managing risk, when we get in the Farm Bill, one of the things we're looking at is what happens, what can be used as a buffer in case we would ever have such a situation that would allow producers and the rest of the industry chain to react in a reasonable manner, rather than just let's put 20% more pork on the domestic market tomorrow morning. Okay. Is that the sign to get off? Oh, okay. I thought you were getting the deal. Many of you have seen this. I'll just touch on it briefly. This was on the internet just recently. Talked about, we're going to go to animal rights now. Talked about this appeal that was made on the internet about trying to stop fox hunting in Colorado. This madness should stop. Forgive me to those of you who have seen this already. This is fox hunting in Colorado. Gives you a little perspective maybe where I come from. But the reality is we have a number of groups, including PETA, HSUS, and others that are trying to drive change in the industry. Our state associations and the FEPC are engaged together with the National Pork Board in trying to get the common sense kind of abilities of producers to deal with the kinds of things they need to do to take care of animals, but also don't do things that are just a nice idea somebody wants to impose on the industry. We've seen what's happened in Europe. I think just recently the Netherlands has now gone the mandatory, they're on track to the mandatory anesthetic castration. There's a whole set of issues like this that are coming up. Most commonly, we all realize that gestation stalls is a big issue. We've seen a lot of state referendums on this. The reality, folks, and the animal rights groups have it published on their website that if the industry got together and says, okay, here's the solution to gestation stalls, and get HSUS to agree, I would submit to you the reality is the next issue will then be sow housing, not pre-breeding, but farrowing housing. You're going to have issues of castration, tail docking, needle teeth clipping, a whole number of issues. So this will go on for quite some time. And as you know, there are a lot of books being written, things in this sort. Now recently, if you haven't seen it, you've seen the U.S. Farm and Ranch Alliance, the National Pork Board, together with FEPC is part of. And the desire is that American consumers are now 3 to 4 to 5 generations away from production agriculture. We've got 23 groups together, national organizations, that are looking at trying to make sure we get the story told about what modern agricultural production does to provide safe, economical food to American consumers. And that effort will be continuing. Right now, there's been over $7 million committed to it on an annual basis. You'll see our hope is we get up to $30, $40 million. The idea is not to start some new farm group that's going to last forever. The idea is everything from pork, beef, corn, soybeans, to vegetable growers, to rice producers, to peanut growers to come together, age people, the American Farm Bureau, to tell the story. Get the story told. We have to change this dynamic. And just to show you some of the tactics we run into, during the H1N1 situation, we had a tracking of issues related to, well, we hear H1N1, but it doesn't really track with what's being said. And what happens is our opposition groups that want to end production agriculture, actually we're using H1N1 for their headline. This happens to be from social networks, and this is from a period of time, the amount of posts being done. But it just highlights, the headline was H1N1, but the message was heart attack, greenhouse gas emissions, CAFOs, cancer, antibiotics, environmental concerns, factory farming. So the net effect of it is we have some opposition very shrewd on how to use the media, and our attempt is to be as shrewd as not shrewder. And it all goes to our social license to produce, and I've talked enough about welfare, but I will talk. There's a number of things going on. The most recent one, a lot of discussion in Nebraska about the possibility there could be a potential referendum there, so we'll see where that goes. Other issues that we're working on right now, and of course, downer animals, gestation stalls, poultry cages, only from the standpoint of what does that deal with as it relates to potential legislation that might reverb on us. I do want to mention downer animals. When you had the Westland Hallmark case in California where you had down dairy cows that were taken into slaughter, they were banned. And they were banned by our Federal Food and Safety Inspection Service. And the state of California passed a law that says thou shalt not slaughter a downed animal. Now, for any new pork producers in this room, you'll know that when you work with animals, you have downed animals that need to be euthanized to be put out pain. But anybody's working with a pig, sometimes the pig has a much different idea of what to do than you do. And one of those things might just be to sit down and not move. The law in California would consider an animal that was either tired or a little cantankerous that didn't want to move as a downed animal. It wouldn't be subject to slaughter. It has about a $500 million ramification on
the pork industry to pork producers, because obviously if that's the case, if they're classified as a down animal, they'll be euthanized and tamed. Okay? So the National Meat Association, together with the American Plant, and then NPPC has been working with the American Association of Veterinarians, which is a trade group of veterinarians that are specific to pork, to put an appeal in that's in front of the Supreme Court right now to challenge this. Because here's the other thing. We have a Federal Food Inspection Act, covers all federally inspected plants. We have a state law that says something different. Now, it happens to be in California. There's one pork plant. There's 2 pork plants in California. But if we get this kind of action, that we get a state law versus a federal law, and the state law prevails in this situation that doesn't take into account the realities of the world, you can see what that could potentially be. So we're working on that one. You're aware of it. Antibiotics. PAMTA is a bill that was introduced, attempted to be introduced, well, actually was introduced through committee the last couple of years, and it deals with removing all antibiotics, animal health aids that can also be used in human medicine from use by producers in agriculture. The reality is we don't see that going very far, but we do have the federal, the Food and Drug Administration is reviewing a thing called Guidance 209 that deals with the label claims on antibiotics. We have some antibiotics that we use that when they were approved a long time ago, had a claim that says it was growth hormone. At the time, they didn't know why it was claimed that way, and it still had that effect. The issues become, gee, should that be used? With that, that is being reviewed by the FDA, and we'll see something happening there. We just had a Food and Drug Administration food safety bill. We expect it to be a precursor to the next reauthorization of the Meat Inspection Act. Remember, USDA takes care of meat inspection in this country. FDA takes care of all other food inspection. One of the things that was in there that we were pretty active in getting out was just an automatic ability of FDA to go to the farm. Now believe me, if you are a pork producer, you produce an animal for whatever reason creates a food safety issue in our packing plant, you will get a visit from our federal government. However, if you don't have a problem, the federal government has no reason to come see you. In a situation that there was proposed in the FDA Act that it would just be moving to inspections of farms. Okay? And we're not in favor of that. We think the industry can do that better through voluntary efforts. Also, traceability will be an issue. NPPC and the pork industry has been very supportive of traceability, animal identification. Part of the reason is the faster we can respond to an animal disease issue, the more rapidly we can get it contained and minimize the effects on the entire industry. The problem is we've got some other species that aren't so enthusiastic, and the way that the whole traceability thing has been done now by our federal government, you get a problem in a given state, say in Iowa, happens to be cattle, believe me, that state will be in a situation from the federal government's perspective to be important. Now, that might be okay if you're in Iowa and you sell the plant that slaughters and harvests knives, and there's no human issues with food safety in that case. But suddenly you can start seeing what can happen. You have something done by another species that can totally impact your business. And finally, just want to point out, you can talk about cool board. I can, country of origin labeling. Side note, the 2002 Farm Bill, very contentious. NPPC did not support it. In fact, we tried to stop it. It was passed. It's the law of the land. However, Canada and Mexico have taken the United States to the WTO on the issue of country of origin labeling because of some of the ramifications the labeling had, and they're seeking regress through the World Trade Organization on this law. If it is found against the U.S., one of the ramifications will be that potentially, the WTO can allow Canada and Mexico to assess penalty duties on our products to the markets. Japan's the number one export market, Canada number two, Lori, Mexico number two, volume. Because then Canada is probably 3 or 4 as it relates to volume. So the net effect of it is we could see a ramification. Interestingly enough, the Mexican pork producers joined this suit in WTO. Because of animal health issues, we do not import live animals from Mexico. We import a very little bit of pork that actually accesses our pork for export markets. The Mexican pork producers are part of it. The reason why they would like to put duties on U.S. pork. So watch that in the future. I mentioned, and I'm going to wrap up here, Mississippi River Basin. And it goes from the headwaters of the Missouri to the headwaters of the Ohio and everything in between. So I suggest most of us live in the Mississippi water basin. In this thing, you've been hearing about a thing called TMDLs, total maximum daily loading rates. And this doesn't have anything to do specifically, it isn't just pork, it's all agriculture. In fact, it's all of society. But I just want this quote. It's vital the EPA continue to work with the basin states to develop numeric nutrient criteria for the major watersheds in the Mississippi mainstream and the northern Gulf of Mexico. That was said last October. Then Lisa Jackson, who's the head of the EPA, I should have put this in your pocket, Howard, so we should hear from you see over the last week. Get closer to this. I want to draw the picture here. She was talking about the Chesapeake Bay TMDLs and the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And right here, she says, now think about the same kind of plan for the Gulf of Mexico, which means the upper Mississippi watershed. Now here's the Chesapeake Bay watershed. You'll see it goes as far south as Virginia, it goes as far north as New York, it goes as far west as West Virginia. And in it, it sets this new program that was just finalized, sets a whole number of miniature total maximum daily loads on these watersheds in the bay. And fundamentally, there are no new concerns with this. However, one of the things about total maximum daily loading depends on what is the water that's coming into your property contain. We saw this happen in Colorado. We had an operation in Colorado that had an issue with it. Because of supposedly they were putting nutrients in the water, and they found out actually that when they tested the water coming into the property, it had more nutrients in it than it did going out. The net effect of it, though, is that if the water coming into the property reaches the maximum loading rate, you can't do anything that would potentially put any nutrients in that water. Okay? Lots of ramifications for how you handle newer products, things of this sort. And it's not just for pork, it's not just for agriculture, it also things like how much fertilizer you put in your nice green lawn. Lots of impact. One of the concerns, however, is as we go through this, and they try to identify the Chesapeake Bay into how big is it. Well, the EPA says that there's a total of 9 million ag acres, but USDA says there's 12. You see the nutrient loading rates. USDA says there's more loading of the nitrogen than EPA does, and the per acre rate is the same. There's more phosphorus loading according to EPA than there is USDA. The whole issue with this is that when you start getting into this, you have two agencies that are conflicting on their numbers. You start getting into issues like, and the colored segments of these for agriculture are actually the agriculture, the rest of it's the rest of the watershed. You start getting into conflicting things about how you manage this. And unfortunately, one of the problems you have with this is that, gee whiz, if there are more urban acres than rural, that means that the urban numbers get to be divided over more acres, and thus the rural acres under fewer acres. See where this thing goes? So this is you're going to see a lot of this coming up. We're working on it. There's another one on baseline of treated loading. Treated loading means things that, for instance, that manure storage that would apply. It deals with nitrogen, just general sediment, things of this order. I'd pay attention to this as we come up, and these point out this is what the current EPA says is happening. This is what the current USDA says is happening. This is what USDA is saying, and if you gave USDA the actual acres it says it's happening, it's even lower, and again, even lower is still. So there's a big fight coming on this. Be aware of it. And you'll see that these changes have changed all over. But again, you're all here, you're going to hear more about this. This is not going to be just management of livestock. It's going to be how much fertilizer you're using. And again, outside of agriculture, it's going to get into issues like, gee, how much fertilizer are you putting on your lawn? I want to leave you with a perspective on the growth in food, industrial, seed usage of corn. This would have been for the corn year that ended in 2004. And as I show you these three pie charts, remember the corn crop gets larger every pie chart. Okay? So as you'll see that we had over half of the corn crop going into feed residual use. In this would have been the harvest for 2004. And then we go to the harvest for 2008, and you'll see that the feed residual is less than 50%. Food industrial seed has been growing significantly. And then this is the current corn crop we're in, and you'll see the growth in food industrial seed, feed and residual. We have the third largest corn crop in the history of the United States, and these are from Dr. Bob Wisner at Iowa, former extension grain analyst at Iowa State, still associated professor emeritus. But on the corn balance sheet, we've had the third largest crop production in the history of the country, and we are having the second lowest carryout projected for this coming August, this coming year. Our soybean situation is not dissimilar. We had a relatively large soybean crop last year, and the carryout you'll see is going from 2.3, that's 2.3 weeks, to 1.9. Something I'd point out, if you're not paying attention to what's happening with availability, I'm talking physical availability of feedstuffs, be watching. I had producers I worked with in 2008 that were in the upper Midwest that couldn't get feed meal at any place. Physically impossible for about a week and a half to actually secure food. Had limited situations in different parts of the upper Midwest, depending on what the previous year's crop was on accessing food. This has a real significant impact. We are, by the way, working with the USDA on this. And let's all pray for a good year of crop weather and lots of acres get planted. Finally, our attitude is the collective power is very strong, and we need to work together to go forward.